Captain, we're getting a signal override. That's impossible. What the hell is happening?
I think someone on this plane is being tracked.
The alarm blared. Captain, we're getting a signal override. This isn't standard, the co-pilot shouted, his voice cutting through the cockpit like a blade. Captain Ji-hoon didn't respond immediately. His eyes were locked on the passenger manifest glowing on the screen in front of him. The aircraft cruised steadily at 35,000 feet, engines humming with mechanical precision, but inside the cockpit, something had shifted. Something invisible, dangerous. His fingers hovered just above the display. There it was. A name he hadn't seen in 3 years. A name that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Claire Dapson, he whispered. The co-pilot turned. What? Ji-hoon blinked, forcing himself back into the moment. Nothing. Maintain heading. But it wasn't nothing. Because 3 years ago, Claire Dapson had disappeared without a trace. And he was the reason why. And right now, somewhere at 35,000 feet, Captain Ji-hoon is about to make a decision that breaks every rule he's ever sworn to follow. But what he doesn't know yet is that the woman on this flight isn't just a passenger. She's the reason everything is about to fall apart. Stay with the story, because what happens next turns a routine flight into something no one on board is prepared for. But before we go any further, where are you watching this from right now? And what time is it over there? Drop it in the comments. I want to see how far this story is reaching. The aircraft cut through the night sky, leaving Seoul behind, bound for Paris. A routine long-haul flight. 217 passengers. Standard crew. Everything exactly as it should be. Except it wasn't. Ji-hoon adjusted his headset, trying to steady his breathing. His mind was no longer in the cockpit. It had already gone back to a night he had spent trying to forget. You're distracted, the co-pilot said quietly. Ji-hoon didn't look at him. Focus on your instruments. I am, but you're not. Silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Ji-hoon exhaled slowly. He couldn't afford mistakes. Not now. Not ever. His career had been built on perfection, on control. That was what his father had demanded. What his family expected. What his future depended on. A future already decided for him. In 2 weeks, he would be married. Not to someone he loved, but to someone chosen. The memory hit him without warning. 3 years ago. A different city. A different sky. Rain fell hard against the glass windows of the airport terminal, blurring the lights outside into streaks of gold and white. Ji-hoon had just landed, exhausted from a long flight, his uniform damp at the edges from the storm. He hadn't planned to stay long. Just enough time to rest, then back in the air. But then he saw her. She stood near the far end of the terminal, half hidden in shadow. Her posture was rigid, her eyes scanning the room like she was searching for something, or someone, or trying not to be found. There was something about her. Not just her beauty, though that was undeniable. It was the tension, the fear she tried and failed to hide. Ji-hoon should have walked away. He didn't. You look like you're waiting for trouble, he had said, stopping a few feet away. She turned sharply, startled. For a second, he saw it clearly, the panic in her eyes. Then it was gone. I could say the same about you, she replied. Her voice was calm, but her hands betrayed her. Slight tremor. Subtle. Almost invisible. Almost. Pilot, he said, nodding toward his uniform. Not trouble. She studied him for a moment longer than necessary. Then she smiled faintly. That depends on where you fly. That was how it started. A conversation that should have ended in minutes stretched into hours. They sat in a quiet corner of the terminal cafe, the storm raging outside, the world shrinking to just the two of them. She told him her name. Claire. No last name. No details. Every question he asked, she deflected with careful precision. And yet, she stayed. Back in the present, Ji-hoon's grip tightened around the control yoke. Claire Dapson, he repeated under his breath. This wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be. Captain, the co-pilot said again, more firmly this time. We just received a directive from ATC. They're requesting a possible route adjustment. Ji-hoon frowned. For what reason? No reason given. That was unusual. Air traffic control didn't issue vague instructions. Not on international routes. Not at this altitude. Tell them we require clarification, Ji-hoon said. The co-pilot nodded and relayed the message. Ji-hoon's eyes drifted back to the manifest. Seat 32A. He could almost see her sitting there, waiting, watching, just like before. The rain hadn't stopped that night. If anything, it had gotten worse. You shouldn't be here, Claire had said suddenly, her voice lower now. Ji-hoon frowned. In an airport? She shook her head. With me. He leaned back in his chair. That sounds like a warning. It is. From what? She hesitated. For the first time, she looked directly at him. Not guarded, not distant, but real. From people who don't forgive mistakes, she said. Ji-hoon felt a chill run through him. What kind of mistake? He asked. But she didn't answer. Instead, she stood abruptly. You should go. And you? He asked. I can't. There was something final in her tone. Something that told him this wasn't just fear. It was certainty. Captain, they're insisting, the co-pilot said, pulling Ji-hoon back to the present. They want us to divert. To where? There was a pause. Dubai. Ji-hoon's head snapped up. That's not even on our route. I know. Did they give a reason? No. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He looked at the instruments, the steady readings, the calm sky ahead. Everything looked normal. But it wasn't. Not anymore. You don't understand, Claire had said that night, her voice breaking slightly. If they find me... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Ji-hoon studied her carefully. The fear was real. Not exaggerated. Not imagined. Real. Who are they? He asked. She shook her head. You don't want to know. Try me. For a moment, it looked like she might actually tell him. Then she looked away. It's already too late for me, she said quietly. But it doesn't have to be for you. Ji-hoon leaned forward. Then let me help. She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. You don't even know what you're offering. Then tell me. Silence. Long. Heavy. Then finally. They don't let people leave, she said. Captain, the co-pilot said, his voice tense now. We've received a second directive. Immediate compliance required. Ji-hoon didn't respond. His mind was racing. Claire. The diversion. The lack of explanation. It was all connected. It had to be. Captain? Ji-hoon made a decision. Maintain current course, he said. The co-pilot stared at him. That's a direct order from ATC. I'm aware. Then we have to follow it. Ji-hoon turned to him, his expression calm, but his eyes were anything but. No, he said quietly. We don't. 3 years ago, Ji-hoon had made a choice. A choice that changed everything. And now, at 35,000 feet, he was about to make another. Only this time, the cost would be far greater. The cockpit door clicked softly as it sealed behind the flight attendant. She's in 32A, she said, her voice low, careful. Window seat. She hasn't moved much since boarding. Ji-hoon didn't turn immediately. He kept his eyes on the instruments, forcing himself to breathe evenly, as if the words hadn't just confirmed what he already knew. Is she alone? He asked. The attendant hesitated. Not exactly. That got his attention. What does that mean? There are 2 men seated across the aisle. 32C and 32D. They've been watching her. Not obviously, but enough that I noticed. Ji-hoon's pulse ticked up. Describe them. Mid-30s. One of them is tall, broad shoulders, dark jacket. The other, shorter, sharper eyes. They haven't spoken to her, but she paused. It feels wrong. Everything about this felt wrong. Did she say anything to you? Ji-hoon asked. The attendant glanced at the co-pilot, then back at him. She passed me this. She slid a folded piece of paper across the console. Ji-hoon stared at it for a second before picking it up. His fingers tightened slightly as he unfolded it. For words. They found me. Stay away. A cold weight settled in his chest. Captain, the co-pilot said carefully. We need to respond to ATC. Ji-hoon folded the note slowly, his mind racing faster than the aircraft slicing through the sky. "Tell them we're assessing the request," he said. "That's not going to hold for long." "It doesn't need to." The co-pilot studied him. "What's going on?" Ji-hoon didn't answer immediately. Because the truth sounded insane. Because the truth could cost him everything. "There's a passenger on this flight," Ji-hoon said finally, his voice measured. "Someone who shouldn't be here." The co-pilot frowned. "That's not exactly helpful." "She's being followed," Ji-hoon added. That landed. The co-pilot straightened slightly. "Followed by who?" "I don't know," Ji-hoon said. "But I think they're already on board." Silence. Then, "You're serious?" "Yes." The co-pilot exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, let's say you're right. That still doesn't explain why ATC is pushing a diversion." Ji-hoon's gaze hardened. "It explains everything." 3 years ago, Ji-hoon had made a promise he didn't fully understand. "I need to disappear," Claire had said that night, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Ji-hoon stared at her across the small hotel room he had booked at the airport. "You don't just disappear," he said. "Not without help." "I know. And you think I can help you?" "I think you already decided you would," she replied quietly. That caught him off guard. "Why me?" he asked. She hesitated, then said something that stayed with him long after that night. "Because you're the only person here who still looks like he has a choice." Ji-hoon didn't respond. Because she was right. He did have a choice. He just didn't realize how much it would cost him. Back in the present, Ji-hoon stared at the flight path display.
Dubai.
It wasn't just off-route. It was controlled.
Strategic.
Whoever issued that order knew exactly what they were doing. "Captain," the co-pilot said again, tension creeping into his voice. "We can't ignore this much longer." Ji-hoon nodded slowly. "We won't." He reached forward and adjusted a setting on the console. "But we're not following it either." The co-pilot blinked. "That's not how this works." "It is tonight." In the cabin, Claire sat perfectly still. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers interlocked so tightly they had begun to ache. She kept her gaze fixed on the window, the endless darkness outside reflecting faintly against the glass. But she wasn't looking at the sky. She was watching the reflection behind her. The two men hadn't moved much. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough. She had known this would happen. She just hadn't expected it so soon. Or here. Her heart pounded once, hard, when the flight attendant leaned down beside her. "He knows," the attendant whispered subtly. Claire didn't react outwardly. But inside, everything shifted.
Ji-hoon.
He was here. Of all the flights. Of all the places, it had to be him. And that meant one thing. Everything was about to go wrong. "Cabin report?" Ji-hoon asked over the intercom. The lead attendant responded calmly, but there was an edge beneath her professionalism. "Passengers are stable. Minor turbulence expected in 15 minutes. Any unusual activity?" A pause. Then, "We're monitoring 2 individuals in the mid-cabin section. No direct incidents yet." Ji-hoon closed his eyes briefly. That confirmed it. "They're not just watching," he said quietly to himself. "They're waiting." "For what?" the co-pilot asked. Ji-hoon opened his eyes. "For us to land." 3 years ago, Ji-hoon had crossed a line he could never uncross. "You're asking me to break multiple international laws," he said, pacing the room. Claire stood by the window, the city lights flickering behind her. "I'm asking you to help me survive." "That's not the same thing." "It is to me." Ji-hoon stopped. "You don't even trust me enough to tell me what you're running from," he said. Claire turned to face him. For the first time, there were no walls, no deflection, just truth. "I worked for people I didn't understand," she said. "At first, it felt like opportunity, power, influence. And then, her expression hardened. I saw what they were really doing." Ji-hoon felt the shift immediately. "This isn't just money or corruption, is it?" She shook her head. "It's bigger than that." "How big?" Claire stepped closer. "Big enough that if they think I'm alive," she said softly, "they won't stop until I'm not." "Captain." The co-pilot's voice snapped Ji-hoon back. "We've got company." Ji-hoon looked up sharply. On the radar, two fast-moving signals had appeared.
Closing in. Fast.
His stomach dropped. No, he muttered. What is it? The co-pilot demanded. Ji-hoon's eyes locked on the screen. Military jets. The co-pilot went pale. That's not possible. It is now. Why would they? They're not here for us, Ji-hoon said.
He didn't need to say the rest.
They both knew. In C-32A, Claire felt it before she saw anything. The subtle shift in the aircraft. The change in engine tone. Something was happening. One of the men across the aisle leaned forward slightly, speaking under his breath to the other. Claire caught just one word. Soon. Her heart began to race. This was it. Back in the cockpit, alarms didn't sound. But the tension was louder than any warning system. Captain, we need to comply now, the co-pilot said urgently. This is no longer optional. Ji-hoon stared ahead, his mind crystal clear despite the chaos closing in around him. 3 years ago, he had helped her disappear. Tonight, he had a choice. Let them take her, or break every rule he had ever lived by. His grip tightened on the controls. Prepare for course deviation, he said. The co-pilot stared at him in disbelief. You're not serious. Ji-hoon didn't look at him. I've never been more serious in my life. Outside, the two jets drew closer. Inside, everything was about to change. And, this time, there would be no going back. Captain, they're signaling us. The co-pilot's voice had lost its earlier restraint. It was sharp now, urgent, edged with something dangerously close to panic. Ji-hoon didn't answer immediately. Outside the cockpit window, two fighter jets cut through the darkness, their presence unmistakable now, sleek shadows pacing the aircraft on either side. Their navigation lights blinked in controlled rhythm, cold and deliberate. They're requesting immediate compliance, the co-pilot continued, his hands hovering uncertainly over the controls. We need to acknowledge. Ji-hoon finally spoke. Maintain radio silence for 10 seconds. 10 seconds? The co-pilot repeated, incredulous. Do you understand what that means in this situation? Yes, Ji-hoon said calmly. It means we have 10 seconds to think. The co-pilot stared at him. We don't have 10 seconds. Ji-hoon's eyes flicked once more to the radar, then to the navigation display.
He did. He just had to use them well.
In C-32A, Claire's breathing had become shallow, controlled, deliberate. She forced herself not to look at the men across the aisle, but every instinct screamed at her to move. Not yet. Moving too soon would confirm everything. But staying still might cost her everything. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the seat. 3 years. 3 years of running, hiding, rebuilding a life that wasn't hers. And now, she had walked straight back into the storm. She closed her eyes briefly. Ji-hoon, what are you doing? 3 years ago, the decision had come faster than he expected. I can get you out, Ji-hoon had said, his voice low but firm. Claire had stared at him, searching his face for hesitation. She didn't find any. You don't even know how, she said. I'll figure it out. That's not a plan. It's enough. Claire shook her head slowly. You're risking everything. Ji-hoon met her gaze. You said it yourself. I still have a choice. And if this goes wrong? He didn't look away. Then it goes wrong. There was a long silence. Then Claire exhaled softly, like someone stepping off the edge of something irreversible. Okay, she said. Then listen carefully. Captain, the co-pilot snapped, pulling Ji-hoon back to the present. They're escalating. We need to respond now. Ji-hoon nodded once. Open the channel. The co-pilot didn't hesitate this time. Unidentified commercial aircraft. You are instructed to alter course immediately and proceed to Dubai International Airport. A firm, controlled voice came through the headset. Failure to comply will result in further action. Ji-hoon leaned slightly toward the mic. This is Captain Ji-hoon of Flight KJ-472, he said evenly. Requesting clarification on diversion order. There was a brief pause. Then, Captain, this is a directive under International Aviation Authority. You are not authorized to request clarification. Alter your course immediately. Ji-hoon's expression didn't change. Unable to comply at this time, he replied. The silence that followed was heavy. Then, Captain, you are placing our passengers at risk. This is your final warning. Ji-hoon ended the transmission. The co-pilot turned to him, eyes wide. You just ignored a direct military order. Ji-hoon exhaled slowly. Yes. In the cabin, one of the men stood up. Not abruptly, not suspiciously, but with purpose. Claire felt it instantly. Her body tensed, every nerve firing. The man adjusted his jacket casually and began moving down the aisle. Not toward the front, toward her. Cabin alert. The lead attendant's voice came through the intercom. Controlled but tight. Passenger movement in midsection. Possible situation developing. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. How far? He asked. 5 rows away from her. Too close. Way too close. Ji-hoon's mind raced. Time was collapsing. Everything was happening faster than expected. Lock cockpit access, he ordered. Already done, the co-pilot replied. Good. Ji-hoon looked at the navigation again. If he was going to do this, he had to do it now. 3 years ago, everything had moved just as fast. You'll board under a different identity, Ji-hoon had explained, pacing the small room. I can get you listed as crew transfer. It won't raise immediate suspicion. And after that? Claire asked. I know someone who can help you disappear completely once you land. You trust them? Ji-hoon hesitated. No, he said honestly. But I trust that they hate the people chasing you more.
Claire almost smiled at that.
Not exactly comforting. It's the best I've got. She studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Then let's do it. Back in the present, Ji-hoon reached forward and adjusted the flight controls. The aircraft shifted, slightly at first. Then more. What are you doing? The co-pilot demanded. Changing altitude. That's not going to stop them. I'm not trying to stop them, Ji-hoon said. I'm buying time. Ahead. Waiting. In the cabin, the man stopped beside Claire's row. He didn't look at her immediately. Instead, he reached up, pretending to adjust the overhead compartment. Claire kept her gaze forward, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it could be heard.
Then,
he leaned down slightly. Just enough. You shouldn't have gotten on this plane, he said quietly. Claire didn't move, didn't respond, didn't even breathe differently. The man smiled faintly. It won't matter soon. Then he straightened and continued down the aisle. But not far. He stopped 2 rows ahead. Waiting. Captain, altitude change confirmed, the co-pilot said. But they're matching us. Of course they were. Ji-hoon's eyes narrowed. He needed something else. Something unpredictable. Something. Wait, he said suddenly. What? Ji-hoon leaned closer to the radar. There's a storm system ahead. The co-pilot frowned. Severe turbulence. We were supposed to avoid it. Ji-hoon nodded slowly. Yes. Realization hit the co-pilot instantly. No, he said. Absolutely not. It's our only option. It's not an option. It's a risk to everyone on board. It's a risk either way. Ji-hoon shot back. At least this one gives us control. The co-pilot shook his head. You're not thinking clearly. Ji-hoon turned to him, his voice quiet but firm. I've never been more clear. 3 years ago, the moment had come at the gate. Claire stood beside him, dressed in a uniform that wasn't hers, holding documents that shouldn't exist. This is it, Ji-hoon said. She nodded, but she didn't move. What is it? He asked. Claire looked at him, really looked at him. You can still walk away, she said. Ji-hoon didn't hesitate.
No.
Her eyes softened, just for a second. Then don't look back, she said. Back in the present, Ji-hoon's hand hovered over the controls. The storm loomed ahead. Dark, violent, unforgiving. The jets stayed close. The cabin was on edge. The men were waiting. Claire was trapped. And everything was seconds away from collapsing. Brace the cabin, Ji-hoon said. The co-pilot stared at him. You're really doing this? Ji-hoon didn't answer. He pushed the controls forward. The aircraft tilted. And then, they flew straight into the storm. Inside the cabin, The lights flickered violently. Passengers gasped as turbulence hit without warning. Overhead bins rattled. Claire gripped her seat, her heart slamming against her chest. The man 2 rows ahead turned sharply, thrown off balance for a split second. For the first time, they weren't in control. Back in the cockpit, alarms began to sound. Wind shear warnings. Turbulence alerts. The aircraft shook hard, but Ji-hoon held steady. Outside, visibility dropped to almost nothing. The jets hesitated, then pulled back slightly. "It's working," the co-pilot said, disbelief in his voice. "For now," Ji-hoon replied. But he knew this was just the beginning. And somewhere in the chaos, Claire finally allowed herself one thought. "He didn't let me fall again." The aircraft dropped suddenly. A wave of screams rippled through the cabin as turbulence slammed into the plane like a physical force. Overhead compartments rattled violently, and the lights flickered again, casting the interior into brief flashes of darkness and pale yellow. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The lead attendant's voice came through, steady but strained. In the cockpit, every alarm seemed to be shouting at once. Wind shear increasing, the co-pilot yelled, gripping his controls tightly. "We need to stabilize." "I'm on it," Ji-hoon said, his voice calm despite the chaos. The aircraft shook again, harder this time, but his hands didn't. In the cabin, the sudden turbulence had done something neither side expected. It broke the rhythm. The man standing 2 rows ahead of Claire stumbled, grabbing onto a seat to steady himself. The other one across the aisle cursed under his breath, his composure cracking for just a second. Claire saw it. Opportunity. She didn't hesitate. She unbuckled her seatbelt quickly but smoothly, keeping her movements low and controlled. Around her, passengers were distracted, terrified, focused on the storm, not on her. She stood just as the plane jolted again. "Ma'am, sit down," a nearby passenger shouted. She ignored him. Her eyes locked briefly with a flight attendant down the aisle. A silent understanding passed between them.
Now.
"Captain, we've got movement in the cabin," the lead attendant's voice came through urgently. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. "Her? Yes. And the others? They're reacting." Of course they were. Ji-hoon glanced at the radar. The storm was buying them seconds, not minutes. He needed to stretch those seconds as far as they could go. "Keep them separated," he said. "Do whatever you can." Understood. 3 years ago, separation had been the only thing that saved them. "Once we land, you don't look back," Ji-hoon had told her again, his voice firm as they stood near the aircraft door. Claire nodded, but her eyes lingered on him longer than necessary. "And you?" she asked. "I go back to my life." She almost smiled. "Do you believe that?" Ji-hoon didn't answer, because even then, part of him knew there was no going back. Back in the present, Claire moved quickly down the aisle, her balance tested by every violent shake of the aircraft. "Ma'am," the flight attendant called, stepping into her path, but not to stop her. "To the front," she whispered under her breath. Claire nodded once. Behind her, one of the men regained his footing. "Hey," he snapped, pushing past a passenger. "Stop her." Too late. The plane lurched again, throwing him sideways into a row of seats. Passengers screamed.
Chaos spread.
And in that chaos,
Claire ran.
"Captain, they're pursuing her," the attendant reported. Ji-hoon closed his eyes briefly, calculating. Distance, timing, risk. Everything was tightening. "Open the forward galley access," he said. The co-pilot turned sharply. "You can't let her near the cockpit." "I'm not letting her near," Ji-hoon replied. "I'm keeping her alive." The narrow aisle felt endless. Every step Claire took felt like it could be her last. The aircraft shuddered again, and she grabbed onto a seat to steady herself, her breath coming faster now. She was close. So close. Behind her, the men were gaining ground. One of them shoved a passenger aside, ignoring the cries of protest. "Sit down," someone yelled. But no one was in control anymore. 3 years ago, control had slipped just as easily. "You'll land first," Ji-hoon had told her. "I'll delay my exit." "Why?" To make sure no one connects us. Claire studied him carefully. You've thought this through. I had to. And after that? Ji-hoon hesitated, then said quietly, after that, you disappear. She nodded, but something in her expression changed. Ji.
It was the first time she had said his name like that. Soft. Real. Thank you, she said.
He didn't respond, because if he did, he might not let her go. Captain, she's approaching the forward section. The attendant's voice cut in. Ji-hoon nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Get her into the galley. Lock it behind her. And the men? Ji-hoon's gaze hardened. Slow them down. The flight attendant moved just as Claire reached her. This way, she said, grabbing her arm and pulling her into the narrow galley space near the cockpit. The door slammed shut behind them.
Locked.
Claire leaned back against the wall, her chest rising and falling rapidly.
They're not going to stop, she said.
I know, the attendant replied. Claire looked toward the cockpit door. He's in there, isn't he? The attendant hesitated, then nodded. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Of all the places, of all the times, it had to be now. Outside the galley, one of the men reached the door and slammed his hand against it. Open it. No response. He turned to his partner, his expression cold. She's in there. Then we take her out. Captain, they're at the door, the attendant said over the intercom. Ji-hoon's hands tightened slightly on the controls. The storm was beginning to thin, visibility improving. That meant the jets would return. Time was running out. Hold them as long as you can, he said. How? She asked, her voice steady but urgent. Ji-hoon didn't answer immediately, because the truth was, there wasn't a safe way. 3 years ago, safety had never been part of the plan. Once you're gone, Ji-hoon had said, you don't contact me, ever. Claire looked at him, something unreadable in her eyes. Even if I want to? Ji-hoon forced himself to hold her gaze. Especially then. A small, sad smile touched her lips. Then I hope I never need to. Back in the present, Claire opened her eyes. He told you not to let me in, didn't he? She said quietly. The attendant didn't answer. Claire nodded slightly. Figures. She stepped forward, closer to the cockpit door. I need to talk to him. I can't. You can. Claire cut in, her voice firm now. Because if you don't, this plane doesn't land safely. That stopped her. Claire leaned closer to the door. Ji-hoon, she said, her voice low but clear. Inside the cockpit, everything seemed to pause. The storm, the alarms, the tension, all of it faded for just a second. Because he heard her. After 3 years, he heard her voice again. The co-pilot looked at him. Don't. Ji-hoon didn't move. Captain, whatever this is, you cannot. Be quiet, Ji-hoon said softly. Then he reached forward and activated the intercom to the galley. Claire held her breath. Then, why are you here? Ji-hoon's voice came through. No warmth, no hesitation, just control. Claire exhaled slowly. They found me, she said. I figured that out. Then you know what happens if we land where they want. Ji-hoon didn't respond, because he did know. Too well. Outside, the men began forcing the galley door. It wouldn't hold for long. Inside, time collapsed into seconds. You shouldn't have come back, Ji-hoon said. Claire almost laughed. You think I had a choice? Silence. Then, no, he admitted. The co-pilot stared at him. What are you doing? Ji-hoon's eyes were fixed ahead, making a decision. The final one. Ji-hoon, Claire said softly. If they take me, everything I risked, everything you risked, it means nothing. His grip tightened. And if I don't let them, he asked. Claire didn't hesitate. Then they come after you too. Outside, the galley door cracked. The men were breaking through. Inside the cockpit, alarms quieted. The storm was ending. And the real danger was just beginning. Ji-hoon took a slow breath, then said the words that would change everything. Then we don't land. Then we don't land. For a moment, no one spoke. The words hung in the air, heavy, impossible, irreversible. The co-pilot turned slowly, disbelief written across his face. What did you just say? Ji-hoon didn't look at him. His eyes remained fixed ahead, steady, calculating. We don't land, he repeated quietly. That's not a decision you get to make alone, the co-pilot snapped. We have fuel limits, airspace restrictions, 200 people on board. This isn't a game. Ji-hoon's voice didn't rise. I know exactly what it is. Then act like it. I am. In the galley, Claire pressed her back against the wall as the door shook under another violent hit. They're coming through, the attendant said, her voice tight now. Claire's mind raced. Every second counted. Tell him we don't have time, she said. The attendant hesitated. He already knows that. Then tell him this, Claire said, stepping closer to the intercom again. If we land where they want, it's over. Inside the cockpit, Ji-hoon heard every word. And he believed it. 3 years ago, belief had been the only thing holding them together. You said they don't let people leave, Ji-hoon had said as they stood in the dim corridor leading to the boarding gate. Claire nodded. And yet here you are, he continued. I got lucky. Ji-hoon shook his head. You don't believe that. Claire didn't answer immediately. Because she didn't. Luck runs out, she said finally. Then we make sure it doesn't, Ji-hoon replied. Claire looked at him, really looked at him, as if trying to understand how someone could still think like that. You don't know them, she said. Then tell me, he challenged. She hesitated, then leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. They're not just criminals, she said. They're connected. Governments. Corporations. People you don't question. Ji-hoon felt something cold settle in his chest. And you walked away from that? I ran, she corrected. There's a difference. Back in the present, the difference no longer mattered. Running had led her here.
To him.
Again. Captain, we're approaching fuel checkpoint, the co-pilot said, forcing his voice back under control. We can't just stay in the air indefinitely. I'm aware. Then, what's your plan? Ji-hoon didn't answer right away, because plans required certainty. And right now, everything was uncertain. The galley door gave a loud crack. A hinge bent under the pressure. They're getting through, the attendant shouted. Claire's pulse spiked. She looked at the narrow space, the locked cockpit door just inches away, the nowhere left to run. Except, there was always somewhere. If you were willing to risk everything. Open the cockpit, she said. The attendant froze. I can't do that. You can, Claire said firmly. No, I really can't. That's protocol. Claire stepped closer, her voice dropping. Protocol won't matter if they get to me first. Another hit against the door. Louder. Stronger. Closer. The attendant's resolve wavered. Inside the cockpit, Ji-hoon heard it all. Every impact. Every second slipping away. Captain, the co-pilot said, his tone shifting now. Not just urgency, but something else.
Fear.
If they breached that door, Ji-hoon didn't need him to finish. I know. And if you open this cockpit. I know, Ji-hoon repeated. Silence. Then the co-pilot exhaled sharply. You're going to do it anyway. Ji-hoon didn't deny it. 3 years ago, he had opened a door he should have kept closed. You don't owe me anything, Claire had said just before boarding. Ji-hoon shook his head. This isn't about owing. Then what is it about? He didn't answer. Because he didn't fully understand it himself. But he knew one thing. He couldn't walk away. Not from her. Not from this. Go, he said instead. Claire hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then she turned and disappeared down the jet bridge. That was the last time he saw her. Or at least, that's what he thought. Back in the present, the final hinge on the galley door snapped. The metal bent inward. A hand forced its way through the gap. Move, one of the men barked. The attendant stumbled back, pulling Claire with her. There's nowhere left, she whispered. Claire's eyes locked on the cockpit door. Then, Ji-hoon, she said quietly. Inside, he closed his eyes for just a second. Then made his choice. The cockpit lock disengaged with a sharp click. The door opened just enough. Now, the attendant shouted. Claire didn't hesitate. She slipped inside just as the galley door burst open behind her. The cockpit door slammed shut again.
Locked. Sealed.
Safe.
For now.
The co-pilot stared at her, stunned. You've got to be kidding me. Claire leaned against the door, breathing hard, her eyes adjusting to the dim cockpit lights. For a moment, no one spoke. 3 years of silence collapsed into a single glance. Ji-hoon turned slightly. Their eyes met, and everything they didn't say hung between them. You look exactly the same, Claire said softly. Ji-hoon's expression didn't change. You don't, he replied. A faint smile touched her lips. I guess running does that to a person. The co-pilot looked between them. Okay, I'm clearly missing something here. Ji-hoon didn't take his eyes off Claire. She's the reason we're in this situation. That's helpful, the co-pilot muttered. Claire straightened slightly, her composure returning despite everything. They're not going to stop, she said. Not until they get me. Who are they? The co-pilot asked. Claire hesitated, then looked at Ji-hoon. He gave a slight nod. People with access, she said. Resources. Influence. The kind of people who can reroute a plane mid-flight without explanation. The co-pilot went quiet, because that made sense. Why now? Ji-hoon asked. Claire exhaled slowly. Because I made a mistake. Ji-hoon's gaze sharpened. What kind of mistake? The kind that reminds them I'm still alive. Silence. Then, what did you do? He asked. Claire looked straight ahead, her voice steady. I took something. The co-pilot blinked. You stole something from them? Claire nodded. And not just anything, she added. Something they can't afford to lose. Ji-hoon felt the weight of that immediately. What is it? Claire hesitated, then said the words that changed everything. Evidence. The cockpit seemed to shrink, the air heavier. What kind of evidence? Ji-hoon asked. Claire's eyes darkened. The kind that destroys them. The co-pilot let out a quiet breath. That explains a lot. No, Claire said softly. It explains everything. Outside, the two men stood in the galley, staring at the sealed cockpit door. One of them smiled faintly. She's in there, he said. The other nodded. Good. Why? The man's smile didn't fade. Because now, he said, they have nowhere left to go. Inside the cockpit, Ji-hoon stared ahead, his mind moving faster than ever. Fuel, airspace, pursuit, evidence. Claire. Everything was converging. What's your plan? The co-pilot asked again. Ji-hoon didn't answer right away, because this time, there was only one way out, and it would cost him everything. He reached forward and adjusted the heading again. The aircraft shifted, subtly, but decisively. Captain, the co-pilot said slowly. Where are we going? Ji-hoon's voice was calm. Too calm. Somewhere they can't follow. Claire frowned. That place doesn't exist. Ji-hoon glanced at her. For them? He shook his head slightly. No. Then he looked back at the horizon. But for us it just might. And for the first time, since she stepped on that plane, Claire wasn't sure if she should feel relieved or afraid. The aircraft steadied, just slightly, as they broke through the worst of the storm. But the calm didn't last. Captain, they're back, the co-pilot said, his voice low. Ji-hoon didn't need to ask who. On the radar, the two fighter jets had reappeared, repositioning themselves with precision, one slightly above, the other trailing just behind the wing. They're not giving up, Claire murmured. No, Ji-hoon said. They won't. The co-pilot leaned forward. We can't outrun them. Not at this altitude. Not with this aircraft. I'm not trying to outrun them, Ji-hoon replied. Then what are you trying to do? Ji-hoon didn't answer immediately. Because the answer sounded reckless. Because it was. Behind them, a loud bang echoed through the aircraft. All three turned instinctively. They're trying the door again, Claire said. The co-pilot's expression tightened. That door won't hold forever. It doesn't need to, Ji-hoon said. Both of them looked at him. For how long? The co-pilot asked. Ji-hoon's eyes stayed forward. Just long enough. 3 years ago, just long enough had been the only plan they had. You'll have less than 5 minutes once we land, Ji-hoon had told her. After that, They'll start checking records. Claire nodded. 5 minutes is enough. For what? To disappear. Ji-hoon studied her. You sound very sure of that. I have to be, she said. And if something goes wrong? Claire's expression didn't change. Then I run again. Back in the present, running wasn't an option anymore. Not at 35,000 feet. Tell me where the evidence is, Ji-hoon said suddenly. Claire looked at him. Why? Because if we're doing this, he said, I need to know exactly what we're risking. She hesitated. Not because she didn't trust him, but because saying it out loud made it real. It's not just one thing, she said finally. It's a collection. Files. Names. Transactions. The co-pilot frowned. Stored where? Claire met Ji-hoon's gaze. On me. The cockpit went quiet. You're carrying it? The co-pilot asked, disbelief creeping into his voice. Claire nodded. Encrypted drive, she added. Hidden. Ji-hoon's eyes narrowed slightly. Hidden where? Claire didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached up slowly and touched the thin chain around her neck. A small pendant rested just below her collarbone. Ji-hoon stared at it. That's it. She gave a small nod. Everything they've been trying to bury, it's in there. The co-pilot exhaled. You brought that onto a commercial flight? I didn't have a choice, Claire said quietly. Another hit against the cockpit door. Louder this time. They're not going to stop, the co-pilot muttered. Ji-hoon ignored it. His focus had shifted completely. To use it, he said, thinking out loud. We need a secure connection. Somewhere outside their reach. There is no outside their reach, Claire replied. Ji-hoon shook his head slightly. There is, he said. It's just difficult. 3 years ago, difficult had felt impossible. You're going to Paris, Ji-hoon had told her. From there, someone will meet you. And then you disappear. Claire nodded slowly. And you? Ji-hoon hesitated. Then gave the same answer he always gave. I go back to my life. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Back in the cockpit, the co-pilot leaned closer. What are you thinking? He asked. Ji-hoon's eyes flicked between the instruments, the radar, the horizon. Then he spoke. We can't land in any major airport, he said. They'll be waiting. No argument there, the co-pilot replied. We can't stay in controlled airspace either. They'll force us down. So what's left? The co-pilot asked. Ji-hoon didn't hesitate this time. Uncontrolled zones. Claire frowned. You mean off-grid airspace? Ji-hoon nodded. That's not safe, the co-pilot said immediately. Neither is this, Ji-hoon shot back. Outside, one of the fighter jets moved closer. Too close. Captain, they're signaling again, the co-pilot said. Ji-hoon didn't respond. The signal came through anyway. Commercial aircraft, you are in violation of international airspace regulations. Alter course immediately, or you will be intercepted. The message was colder this time. More direct. More final. Claire swallowed. They're running out of patience. Ji-hoon's grip tightened. So am I. Behind them, the cockpit door shook again. A crack formed near the edge. The co-pilot noticed it instantly. That's not good. No, Ji-hoon agreed. It's not. Claire stepped closer. Ji-hoon, she said quietly. He didn't look at her. Whatever you're planning, you need to decide now. He nodded slightly. I know. Silence stretched for a moment. Then, I didn't expect to see you again, she added. That made him pause. Just for a second. Neither did I, he said. A faint, almost sad smile crossed her face. And yet here we are. 3 years ago, that same feeling had lingered at the gate. Claire had turned once before disappearing completely. Just once. As if memorizing his face. As if knowing. It might be the last time. Ji-hoon had stood there long after she was gone, telling himself it was over, that it had to be. Back in the present, over wasn't an option anymore. Captain, the co-pilot said, his voice steady but urgent. We're approaching restricted airspace. Ji-hoon nodded. Good. The co-pilot blinked. Good. That's where we're going. That's where we get shot down, the co-pilot corrected. Ji-hoon shook his head. Not if they don't see us coming. Claire frowned. What does that mean? Ji-hoon reached forward, his fingers moving quickly over the controls. We drop altitude, he said. How low? The co-pilot asked. Ji-hoon's voice didn't waver. Low enough to disappear. The co-pilot stared at him. You can't be serious. I am. At night? In unstable conditions? With passengers on board. Ji-hoon turned slightly, his expression calm but unyielding. Do you have a better idea? The co-pilot didn't answer. Because he didn't. Another crack echoed from the cockpit door. The men were getting closer. Time was gone. Brace the aircraft, Ji-hoon said. The co-pilot hesitated for half a second, then complied. Claire tightened her grip on the pendant around her neck. Everything she had risked, everything she had run from, it had all led to this moment. Ji-hoon, she said softly. He glanced at her. Don't let this be for nothing. He held her gaze for a brief second, then nodded. Outside, the jets adjusted their position again. Tracking, waiting, ready. Inside the cockpit, Ji-hoon made his move. He pulled back slightly, then pushed the controls forward.
Hard.
The aircraft dropped.
Fast.
A sudden, sharp descent that sent everything inside into chaos. Passengers screamed. Loose items flew. The engines roared as the plane cut downward through the night. What are you doing? The co-pilot shouted. Ji-hoon's voice was steady. Disappearing. The radar signals above them faltered. The jets overshot. For a moment, just a moment, they lost visual. In that moment, Ji-hoon took them lower. Into darkness. Into uncertainty. Into the only place left where they might still have a chance. And, behind the cockpit door, the final barrier between safety and disaster started to give way. The aircraft plunged deeper into darkness. Altitude. Altitude, the warning system blared, sharp and relentless. Pull up, pull up. I've got it, Ji-hoon said, his voice steady despite the violent descent. The co-pilot gripped the console, his knuckles white. We're dropping too fast. I know exactly how fast we're dropping. That's not reassuring. The plane shuddered as it cut through unstable air, the turbulence now replaced with something worse. Raw, unpredictable pressure shifts. Passengers screamed again, the sound echoing faintly through the reinforced cockpit door. Claire braced herself against the wall, her heart hammering in her chest. This wasn't controlled. This was survival. Captain, terrain proximity warning is going to kick in if we go any lower, the co-pilot warned. Ji-hoon's eyes never left the instruments. We're not going that low. Then what's the plan? Ji-hoon adjusted the throttle carefully, easing the descent just enough. We level off below their radar sweep. The co-pilot blinked. That's not a guarantee. It's enough. Above them, the fighter jets overshot their position. For a few seconds, the commercial aircraft vanished from their immediate tracking. Target lost visual, one of the pilots reported. Reacquire, came the response. But reacquiring something that had dropped into the darkness wasn't immediate. And those seconds, those few fragile seconds, were everything. Inside the cabin, chaos had taken over. Flight attendants struggled to keep passengers seated as the plane steadied slightly. Stay calm. Stay seated. One of them shouted, moving quickly down the aisle. But calm was gone, replaced by fear, uncertainty, and the growing realization that something was very, very wrong. Near the front, the two men stood by the cracked cockpit door. One of them ran his fingers along the fracture, testing its strength. It won't hold much longer, he said. The other nodded.
Good.
Why? Because once we're in, he replied calmly, this ends. In the cockpit, Ji-hoon adjusted their heading again.
Slight. Precise.
Every move calculated. Speed is stabilizing, the co-pilot said, glancing at the instruments. Altitude holding for now. Ji-hoon nodded. Good. Claire watched him carefully. There was no hesitation in him. No fear in his hands. Just focus. How are you this calm? She asked quietly. Ji-hoon didn't look at her. I'm not, he said. She frowned slightly. You could have fooled me. I learned a long time ago, he added, that panic doesn't solve anything. 3 years ago, panic had almost cost everything. You're shaking, Ji-hoon had said softly as they sat in the dimly lit terminal, waiting for boarding to begin. Claire looked down at her hands. They were trembling. I'm fine, she said quickly. You're not. She exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. I've never done something like this before, she admitted. Running,
Ji-hoon asked.
trusting someone, she corrected. That caught him off guard. Why me? He asked again. Claire met his eyes. Because you didn't ask what you would gain from it. Ji-hoon didn't respond. Because she was right. Back in the present, gain was the last thing on his mind. Captain, the co-pilot said suddenly, they're trying to reacquire us. Ji-hoon glanced at the radar. Signals flickered.
Searching.
They'll find us, Claire said. Yes, Ji-hoon agreed. Eventually. Then what? He didn't answer. Because eventually might already be too late. A loud crack echoed behind them. All three turned instinctively. The cockpit door split slightly along the frame. A thin gap, enough to see shadows moving on the other side. They're almost through, the co-pilot said, his voice dropping. Claire stepped back instinctively. Her grip tightened around the pendant. Ji-hoon. He didn't turn, but he heard her. 3 years ago, he had heard her the same way. You don't have to do this, Claire had said just before stepping onto the plane. Ji-hoon shook his head. I already did. She studied him for a moment, something soft in her expression. Then I won't forget this, she said. He almost smiled. Just survive, he replied. Back in the present, survival wasn't simple anymore. It wasn't just about her. It was about everyone on board. Captain, the co-pilot said, his voice quieter now, more measured. We need a real plan, not just reactions. Ji-hoon nodded slightly. I know. Then tell me what we're doing. Ji-hoon exhaled slowly, then finally said it. We're landing. Claire's head snapped toward him. What? The co-pilot blinked. You just said we weren't landing. We're not landing where they want, Ji-hoon clarified. Then where? The co-pilot asked. Ji-hoon's eyes flicked to the navigation system. There's an airstrip, he said. Unregistered. Off the main routes. The co-pilot frowned. That's not on any official map. Exactly. Claire shook her head slightly. Even if we land there, they'll still find me. Not if we move fast, Ji-hoon replied. And do what? She asked. Expose them, he said simply. The cockpit went quiet. Using the evidence, Ji-hoon continued. We transmit it before they can stop us. The co-pilot let out a short breath. You make that sound easy. It's not, Ji-hoon said. But it's the only way this ends. Behind them, the crack in the cockpit door widened. A hand forced its way through again. Stronger this time. Closer. They're coming through, the co-pilot shouted. Ji-hoon's eyes hardened. Then we don't give them time. He reached forward, adjusting the heading sharply. The aircraft shifted again. Lower.
Faster.
Captain, that strip better be real, the co-pilot muttered. It is. How do you know? Ji-hoon didn't hesitate. Because I've been there before. Claire stared at him. When? She asked. Ji-hoon's expression didn't change. 3 years ago. That hit her instantly. You planned something like this before? No, he said. I survived something like this before. Outside, the jets finally reacquired them. There, one pilot said. Target below. They adjusted course immediately, closing in again. Inside the cockpit, time was gone. The plan was set. The risks were absolute. Prepare for rapid descent, Ji-hoon said. The co-pilot nodded. No hesitation now. Cabin won't like this. They don't have to, Ji-hoon replied. They just have to survive it. Behind them, the cockpit door finally gave way. Just slightly. Enough for a face to appear through the crack. Cold. Focused. Watching. Claire saw it. Her breath caught. They're here, she whispered. Ji-hoon didn't turn. Didn't hesitate. Didn't slow down. Because now, there was only one way out. And it was coming fast, The face at the crack in the cockpit door stayed for only a second. But it was enough. Cold eyes. Controlled breathing. No panic, only intent. Then the hand pushed harder against the frame. Metal groaned. The cockpit wasn't just being attacked anymore. It was being taken. "Brace it," the co-pilot shouted, throwing his shoulder against the door panel from inside. Claire stepped back instinctively, her heartbeat climbing into her throat. "They're not waiting anymore," she said. "No," Ji-hoon replied calmly. "They're done waiting." He tightened his grip on the controls. Outside, the aircraft cut through the night at a dangerous, controlled descent, low enough to avoid radar, unstable enough to be lethal if miscalculated. But Ji-hoon didn't flinch. "Captain, we're approaching the strip," the co-pilot said, voice tight. "If it even exists." "It exists," Ji-hoon repeated. "You keep saying that like it's a fact." "It is." Claire glanced between them. "You've actually landed there before?" Ji-hoon hesitated for the first time. "Yes." The co-pilot frowned. "Under what circumstances?" Ji-hoon didn't answer immediately. Because the memory wasn't simple. "It was off record," he said finally. "Emergency diversion. No authorities. No clearance." Claire narrowed her eyes slightly. "That sounds illegal." "It was necessary," he corrected. 3 years ago, necessity had been the only language they understood. "We can't go through official channels," Ji-hoon had said in the dim hotel room, pacing slowly. "Everything there is monitored." Claire sat on the edge of the bed, listening. "So what do we do?" she asked. "There's a place," he said. "Not recognized. Not logged. Used by pilots who don't want questions." Claire frowned. "That sounds like a myth." Ji-hoon shook his head. "It's real." "And you've been there?" "Once." "Was it safe?" He looked at her then. "No." That honesty had mattered more than comfort. Back in the present, safety was already gone. A loud bang echoed through the cockpit door. The frame bent further inward. "They're breaking through," the co-pilot shouted. Ji-hoon's voice stayed level. "We're almost there." "Almost isn't good enough." "It is today." In the cabin, passengers were now fully aware something was wrong. The descent angle, the instability, the shaking that wasn't turbulence anymore but controlled aggression. "This isn't normal," someone shouted from the back. Flight attendants tried to maintain order, but fear had already spread like fire. Near the front, Claire could hear everything. The panic, the confusion, and behind it all, the certainty that she was the reason. "They're going to crash us," one passenger whispered. "No," another replied. "They're being hijacked." The word hung in the air. Hijacked. But no one knew by who. Or why. In the cockpit, Ji-hoon adjusted their final approach angle. The terrain ahead was dark. Unlit. Barely marked. But real. The off-grid airstrip was coming into view. A thin stretch of possibility in an otherwise endless night. Visual confirmation, the co-pilot said, disbelief creeping in. I see it." Claire leaned forward. "That's it." Ji-hoon nodded once. "That's it." It didn't look like an airport. It looked like a risk carved into the ground. Behind them, the cockpit door finally gave way further. A hand pushed through fully now, followed by an arm. "They're in," the co-pilot shouted. Ji-hoon didn't turn. "Not yet," he said. But the calm in his voice was different now. Focused. Final. 3 years ago, final had almost come too early. "You understand what happens if this fails?" Claire had asked him at the gate. Ji-hoon nodded. "Yes." "And you're still doing it?" "Yes." She searched his face again. "You're either very brave," she said quietly, "or very foolish." He almost smiled. Sometimes they look the same. Back in the present, the aircraft jolted again as the landing approach began. "Gear down," Ji-hoon ordered. The co-pilot complied immediately. Flaps extended. The plane shifted, heavier now, more vulnerable. And outside, the ground was getting closer. Too fast. Too real. "Captain," the co-pilot said urgently, "we've got no runway lights. No guidance systems. This is visual landing only." "I know. That's insane." Ji-hoon's voice dropped slightly. It's necessary. Claire watched him carefully now. For the first time since she stepped into that cockpit, she understood something clearly. He wasn't improvising. He had planned this moment. Not all of it, but enough. Ji-hoon, she said quietly. He glanced at her. If we survive this, what happens after? He didn't answer immediately, because he didn't have that answer anymore. Another crash behind them. The cockpit door gave way further. A shadow stepped inside. Slow, deliberate. The man from the cabin. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. End of the line, he said calmly. The co-pilot stiffened. We've got a breach. Ji-hoon finally turned his head slightly. Just enough to acknowledge him, but not enough to stop flying. Claire stepped back instinctively. The man's gaze locked on her immediately. There you are, he said softly. Ji-hoon's voice cut through the cockpit. Sit down. The man smiled faintly. You think you're in control here? Ji-hoon didn't look away from the runway. I know I am. The aircraft dipped slightly as they aligned for landing. The ground rushed closer. The airstrip was seconds away. But so was chaos. The man stepped forward. The co-pilot moved to block him. Tension snapped tight inside the cockpit. Too many forces, too little space. Claire's breathing quickened. This was it. Everything was collapsing at once. Ji-hoon spoke without looking away. Touch anything, he said quietly, and we all die. The man paused, just for a second, then smiled again. You already decided that the moment you brought her here. The runway was directly ahead now. Dark, silent, waiting. Touchdown in 10 seconds, the co-pilot said. Ji-hoon nodded once. Prepare for impact. The wheels hit the ground. Hard. The aircraft jolted violently, skidding slightly on the rough surface. Passengers screamed again. Inside the cockpit, everything shook but held. For a brief moment, they were on land. Not safe, but grounded. Then, the engines roared as Ji-hoon fought to slow the aircraft. Outside, distant lights appeared. Approaching. Fast. Too fast. They followed us, Claire whispered. Ji-hoon exhaled slowly. No, he said. They tracked us. And as the aircraft finally slowed on the unlit strip, the truth of what came next began to settle in. Because landing was never the end. It was only the beginning. The aircraft finally slowed, but not enough for comfort. Metal groaned as the wheels fought against the rough, unlit strip. The runway was barely a runway at all, just a stretched piece of forgotten ground swallowed by darkness. Inside the cockpit, tension didn't ease. It sharpened. Brakes holding, the co-pilot said through clenched teeth. But barely. Keep it steady, Ji-hoon replied. Claire gripped the side of the seat behind him, her eyes flicking between the instruments and the rear of the cockpit, because she could still feel him there. The man who had breached the cockpit. Watching. Waiting. Not attacking yet. That was the worst part. Captain, the co-pilot said, voice low. We're not alone out here. Ji-hoon already knew. The faint glow in the distance confirmed it. Vehicles. Multiple. Approaching fast. No emergency response would arrive this quickly, the co-pilot added. They didn't come for rescue, Ji-hoon said. Claire's throat tightened. Then what did they come for? Ji-hoon didn't answer immediately, because the answer was already unfolding outside the cockpit window. 3 years ago, she had asked him the same kind of question. If they find me again, Claire had said quietly. What happens? Ji-hoon had looked at her for a long moment, then answered honestly. Then you were never really free. She had nodded slowly. As expected, she said. That had unsettled him. Why would you say that? Claire had looked down at her hands. Because people like me don't just walk away, she said. We escape until someone decides we didn't. Back in the present, the aircraft finally came to a full stop. Silence followed. Not peaceful silence. The kind that comes right before impact. Engines off, Ji-hoon ordered. The co-pilot complied. The hum died instantly. And for the first time since takeoff, everything was still. The cockpit door creaked slightly behind them. The man inside hadn't moved.
But he spoke now.
Interesting landing, he said calmly. No one responded. Claire turned slightly. You followed me across continents, she said quietly. Was it worth it? The man smiled faintly. You were never meant to leave in the first place. Ji-hoon finally turned his head, just enough to see him. Step out, Ji-hoon said. The man tilted his head. Or what? Silence stretched. Because that was the question now.
Or what?
Outside the aircraft, headlights cut through the darkness. One vehicle, then two, then more. The glow spread across the unlit strip like a slow infection. They've secured the perimeter, the co-pilot muttered. Ji-hoon exhaled slowly. Of course they have. Claire felt her stomach drop. This was never just about me, she said quietly. Ji-hoon didn't answer, because she was right. 3 years ago it had started small. A conversation, a request, a decision. But now, it had become something bigger. Something neither of them fully understood when they began running. Ji-hoon, Claire said softly. He looked at her. For the first time since this began. She wasn't just afraid. She was tired. If I go out there, she said, this doesn't end. Ji-hoon held her gaze. I know. And if I stay? Then it escalates. A pause. Then, either way, she said quietly, someone loses. The cockpit door opened wider. The man stepped fully inside now.
Calm.
Unhurried. As if nothing about this situation concerned him. You've done well, he said to Ji-hoon. Ji-hoon didn't respond. The co-pilot moved slightly closer to the console, calculating options that no longer existed. Claire stood still, watching, waiting. Outside, a loud knock echoed against the aircraft hull. Then voices. Orders. Commands. The outside world had arrived, and it was not here to negotiate. You think this ends on a runway in the middle of nowhere? The man said softly. Ji-hoon finally spoke. I think it ends when I decide it does. The man smiled again. That's where you're wrong. Claire stepped forward. Tell me what you want, she said firmly. The man turned his gaze to her. You already know. No, she replied. I know what you think you want, not what this is. That made him pause slightly. Just enough. 3 years ago, she had realized something important. They don't just chase people, she had told Ji-hoon. They chase control. What does that mean? He had asked. It means, she said quietly, it was never about me escaping. It was about proving I couldn't. Back in the present, Ji-hoon looked at Claire. And understood. This was a message, he said. The man nodded slightly. Finally. Claire shook her head. You're using me. The man didn't deny it. Everyone is used, he said simply. The difference is who survives it. Outside, footsteps approached the aircraft stairs. Metal clanged. Someone was boarding. Slowly, deliberately. The co-pilot leaned toward Ji-hoon. We have maybe minutes before they reach us. Ji-hoon nodded. I know. And then what? Ji-hoon looked at Claire. At the cockpit. At the man. At the unfolding reality that could no longer be reversed. Then said quietly. Then we stop running. Claire frowned. That's not a plan. It's the truth, Ji-hoon replied. The boarding steps groaned under weight. Closer now. The man inside the cockpit turned slightly. You've bought time, he said. Not freedom. Ji-hoon didn't respond. Because he knew that too. Claire took a slow breath. And for the first time, she wasn't looking for escape. She was looking for understanding. What do you want from me? She asked again. This time, the man answered differently. Not you, he said. Information. Silence. The word changed everything. Ji-hoon's expression tightened slightly. Claire froze. Because she understood what that meant. The pendant around her neck suddenly felt heavier. The co-pilot noticed immediately. What is that? He asked quietly. Claire didn't answer. Outside, the footsteps stopped at the aircraft door. A knock. Then a voice. Open up. Inside the cockpit. No one moved. No one spoke. Because the final decision was no longer about flying. It was about what they were willing to give up. And, in that silence, Claire finally whispered something only Ji-hoon could hear. "If I open this, there's no coming back." Ji-hoon looked at her and answered simply, "I already came back for you once." The cockpit went still. Outside, the door handle began to turn. The cockpit door handle turned slowly. Not rushed, not forced. Controlled, deliberate. Like whoever was outside already knew they would be let in. Inside, no one moved. Claire stared at the door, her hand instinctively rising toward the pendant at her neck. Ji-hoon noticed. So did the co-pilot. But neither of them spoke, because words now would only delay the inevitable. The latch clicked. One final sound. Then, the door opened. Cold air from outside slipped into the cockpit first, carrying dust, diesel, and something heavier, authority. A man stepped in. Not the one from the cabin. This one was different. Cleaner suit. Colder expression. No urgency in his movements. As if time belonged to him. His eyes scanned the cockpit once. Then settled on Claire. "You've been difficult to locate," he said calmly.
Claire didn't respond.
Ji-hoon shifted slightly, blocking her line of sight. The man noticed. "And you are?" Ji-hoon held his gaze. "The pilot." A faint smile.
"Yes.
"I assumed that much." Outside the aircraft, engines idled. Vehicles surrounded the strip now, headlights forming a ring of light in the darkness. The aircraft was no longer a plane. It was a container, a sealed space between decisions. The co-pilot leaned slightly toward Ji-hoon. "We're out of options," he whispered. Ji-hoon didn't look at him. "There are always options," he said quietly, "but not always good ones." Claire finally spoke. "What do you want from me?" The man sighed slightly, as if the question bored him. "Not you," he repeated, then corrected himself. "Correction. Not all of you." His eyes flicked briefly to her pendant. "Just what you took." Silence. It hit the cockpit harder than turbulence ever had. Because now it was confirmed. This was never random. Never coincidence. It was retrieval. Claire's voice lowered. "I didn't steal it." The man tilted his head. "No. I exposed it." That made him pause. Just briefly. Then, "Same thing," he said. Ji-hoon finally spoke again. "You followed her across international airspace for data?" The man looked at him properly now. "For leverage," he corrected. The co-pilot let out a short, disbelieving breath. "You hijacked an aircraft for paperwork." The man didn't react. "Information," he said again, "has always been more valuable than people." Claire's jaw tightened. "That's not true." "It is in practice." 3 years ago, Ji-hoon had thought he understood risk. "You're too involved," Claire had told him quietly. "I'm not involved," he had replied. Claire had almost laughed. "You already are." Back in the present, Ji-hoon made a decision. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just final. He stepped slightly forward. "You're not taking her," he said. The man looked at him. "And what exactly do you think you're going to do about that?" Ji-hoon didn't answer immediately, because the truth was simple. Nothing he had done so far was enough. But stopping now was worse. Outside, a second knock echoed through the aircraft. This time heavier, impatient. Claire closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. "I'll give it to you," she said. Ji-hoon turned sharply. "No." The co-pilot looked confused. "Wait, what?" Claire raised her hand slightly. "Not because you're asking," she said to the man. "Because I'm ending this." The man studied her, then nodded slowly. "Smart choice." Claire reached for the pendant. The co-pilot stepped forward. "You don't have to." But Ji-hoon stopped him with a glance. Because he understood something in her expression. This wasn't surrender. It was control. Claire unclasped the pendant. Her fingers trembled slightly. Not from fear. From exhaustion. 3 years of running, hiding, surviving. All compressed into this single moment. Ji-hoon spoke softly. "After this, they won't stop." Claire nodded. "I know. And you're still doing it?" She looked at him, and for the first time, There was no fear in her eyes. Only clarity. I already lived like I was dead, she said quietly. I just want it to mean something. She handed the pendant forward. The man took it carefully, almost respectfully. Outside, the engines of the surrounding vehicles began to idle down. The pressure in the air shifted immediately, like something had been resolved, or claimed. The co-pilot exhaled slowly. So that's it, he asked quietly. Claire didn't answer. Ji-hoon didn't either, because they both knew it wasn't. The man turned to leave, then paused at the cockpit door. Thank you for your cooperation, he said politely. Ji-hoon stared at him. That wasn't cooperation, he said. The man smiled faintly. From our perspective, he replied, it was. And then he left. The cockpit door closed behind him. Not slammed, not forced.
Just closed.
Like nothing had happened at all. Silence returned. But it wasn't peace. It was aftermath. The co-pilot finally spoke. We just gave it to them? Claire stared at the empty space where the pendant had been. No, she said quietly. We just started something. Ji-hoon looked at her. What did you mean? He asked. Claire exhaled slowly. That wasn't all of it. The co-pilot frowned. You said it was everything. I said it was what they were chasing, she corrected. A beat. Then realization started forming. Slow. Heavy. Ji-hoon's voice dropped slightly. What else is there? Claire met his gaze. Something in her expression shifted. Because now, there was no more running. No more hiding. Only truth. I memorized the rest, she said quietly. Silence hit the cockpit again. Harder this time. Outside. Engines started. Vehicles began moving away. The perimeter loosening. Not because the threat was gone, but because the objective had been achieved. The co-pilot shook his head slightly. You're telling me, he said slowly, they didn't need the pendant itself. Claire nodded. They just needed me to believe they did. Ji-hoon understood immediately. This was never about retrieval, he said quietly. Claire shook her head. It was about confirmation. Outside, the last headlights faded into the distance. The aircraft sat alone again. But not free. Not safe. Just postponed. The co-pilot finally asked the question no one wanted to say out loud. What happens now? Claire looked at Ji-hoon. Ji-hoon looked at the runway. Then at the sky. Then said quietly, now we decide who we really are when no one is chasing us anymore. A long silence followed. Not empty. Heavy with consequence. And far above them, somewhere in the dark sky they had just escaped from, something else began to move. Quietly. Patiently. As if the story had never really ended. Only changed direction. And in the end, what began as a routine flight at 35,000 feet became a decision that changed everything Ji-hoon believed about duty, love, and survival. If you stayed till this moment, you already know, some choices don't end when the plane lands. They follow you forever. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next story might just reveal who is really in control all along.